Her fate was signed in ink. Aurora Darasi had spent years pretending she wasn't born into this world. But when she ran from a truth she was never meant to know, she became a target. Tommaso Benedetti leaned against the doorway, his dark gaze unreadable. "You thought you could disappear?" he murmured, shaking his head. "You were never free." Chapter 1. The Ghost of the Past Returns. The rain lashed against the windows of Aurora's small bookstore, mimicking the turmoil that had suddenly erupted within her. Outside, the cobblestone streets of Florence glistened, reflecting the blurred lights of passing cars. It was a Tuesday, typically a quiet evening, the kind where the scent of old paper and brewing coffee usually provided a comforting sanctuary. But tonight, the familiar peace was shattered. Aurora, at 58, had carefully constructed a life of quiet anonymity. Her silver hair, usually neatly pinned, had come loose, strands framing a face that, despite the fine lines etched by time and worry, retained a striking elegance. Her hands, usually steady as she shelved books or poured tea for a customer, trembled slightly as she stared at the man who had just entered her shop. He was a ghost, a specter from a past she had buried deep, a past she had convinced herself was nothing more than a nightmare. He stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from the hem of his dark, tailored coat, forming a small puddle on the worn wooden floor. Tommaso Benedetti. Even after all these years, the name resonated with a power that made her heart clench. He was older, of course, the lines around his intense, dark eyes deeper, the once jet-black hair now streaked with silver at the temples. But the predatory grace, the inherent danger that had always clung to him like a second skin, remained undiminished. It was a presence that filled the small space, suffocating the familiar comfort. "Aurora," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very shelves around them. It was a voice she had tried to forget, a voice that had once whispered promises and threats in equal measure. She forced herself to meet his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her own blue eyes, a defiance that masked a rising tide of panic. "Tommaso," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the internal chaos. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze sweeping over the bookstore, taking in the worn armchairs, the overflowing shelves, the small, round table near the window where a half-finished game of chess sat. It was a life so drastically different from the one he knew, the one she had once known. A life she had meticulously crafted to escape him and everything he represented. "You thought you could disappear?" he murmured, finally, shaking his head slowly. The movement was almost gentle, but the underlying steel in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. "You were never free, Aurora. You knew that." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, with the weight of years of secrets and lies. Aurora had spent decades running, building walls around her heart, burying the memories of her youth, of the Darasi family, of the brutal code of honor and the bloody legacy that came with it. She had changed her name, her appearance, her entire life. She had become someone else, someone ordinary, someone safe. Or so she had thought. "I left that life behind," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and fear. "I want nothing to do with it. With you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can change your name, Aurora. You can change your hair, your clothes, your city. But you can't change your blood. You can't change who you are." He took a step closer, and Aurora instinctively recoiled, her back pressing against the counter. The scent of him, a blend of expensive cologne and something darker, something wilder, filled her senses, triggering a flood of unwanted memories. Memories of lavish dinners in the Darasi mansion, the clinking of crystal glasses, the hushed conversations in dimly lit rooms. Memories of her father, Don Alessandro Darasi, a man of immense power and ruthless ambition. Memories of the night she had overheard a conversation that had shattered her world and sent her running into the night. "I made a choice," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the drumming of the rain. "I chose a different life." "A lie," he countered, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A beautiful, elaborate lie. But lies always unravel, Aurora. Always. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her face. Aurora flinched, but she didn't look away. His fingers, long and elegant, were marred by a thin, white scar that ran across the back of his hand, a silent testament to the violence that was woven into the fabric of his existence. "Why are you here, Tommaso?" she repeated, the question a desperate plea. "What do you want?" His eyes, dark and unreadable, held hers captive. "Your father is dead, Aurora," he said, the words blunt and brutal. "And there are complications." The news, though not entirely unexpected, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had known, intellectually, that her father, a man who had lived by the sword, would likely die by it. But the finality of it, the confirmation, sent a wave of grief and guilt washing over her. Grief for the man he had been, a man she had both loved and feared. Guilt for abandoning him, for leaving him to face the consequences of his choices alone. Complications? She echoed, the word a fragile whisper. Tommaso's gaze hardened. The Derossi family is vulnerable. There are those who would see it fall. Those who would exploit your absence. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Aurora understood. She was the only surviving heir, the only one who could legitimately claim the mantle of leadership, the only one who could hold the family together, or tear it apart. "And you?" she began, then hesitated, the question hanging unspoken in the air. "I am here to protect you," he said, the words simple, yet laced with a complex undercurrent of meaning. Protection, in Tommaso's world, came at a price. A price she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. He took another step, closing the distance between them. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a dangerous mix of fear and a strange, unsettling familiarity. He was close enough now that she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes, the subtle graying at his temples. He was older, yes, but the power he exuded was as potent as ever. "You have a choice, Aurora," he said, his voice low and resonant. "You can return. You can reclaim your birthright. Or you can let everything your father built crumble to dust." His words were a challenge, a threat, and a promise all rolled into one. Aurora looked at him, at the man who represented everything she had tried to escape, and knew that her carefully constructed life of peace and anonymity was over. The ghost of her past had returned, and it was demanding to be acknowledged. The rain continued to fall, washing away the illusion of safety she had so desperately clung to. She felt the familiar tremor begin in her hands again, but this time there was a flicker of something else, too. A spark of defiance. A flicker of the woman she had once been, the woman she had tried so hard to forget. The woman who was, after all, a Derossi. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Forgotten Life. The drive was silent, punctuated only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers against the relentless rain. Aurora sat stiffly in the passenger seat of Tommaso's sleek, black car, her gaze fixed on the blurred cityscape rushing past. Florence, a city she had once known intimately, now felt foreign, hostile. Each familiar landmark, each winding street, was a painful reminder of the life she had abandoned, the life she was now being forced to confront. Tommaso drove with a focused intensity, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He hadn't spoken since they left the bookstore, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions, with the weight of their shared history. Aurora stole glances at him, studying his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man shrouded in shadows, a man of secrets and contradictions. He had always been that way, even when they were young, a dangerous enigma that both terrified and fascinated her. She remembered him as a boy, already hardened by the world he inhabited, his eyes holding a wisdom beyond his years. He was her father's protégé, the son of his most trusted consigliere, groomed from a young age to take his place in the family. He had been her shadow, her protector, her confidant, and, for a brief, reckless time, something more. A memory surfaced unbidden, of a summer evening long ago. They were teenagers, hidden away in the sprawling gardens of the Dirassi estate. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and roses. Tommaso had found a small, injured bird, its wing broken. He had held it gently in his large hands, his touch surprisingly tender, as he fashioned a makeshift splint. Aurora had watched him, mesmerized, struck by the contrast between his inherent strength and the gentleness he displayed. It was a moment that had stayed with her, a glimpse of the humanity that lay hidden beneath his carefully constructed facade. But that gentleness had always been tempered by a ruthless pragmatism, a willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect the family, to uphold the code. It was that ruthlessness that had ultimately driven her away. The overheard conversation, the casual discussion of a necessary sacrifice, the chilling realization that her own life might be expendable, had shattered her illusions and sent her fleeing into the night. The car turned onto a long, winding driveway, lined with ancient cypress trees. Aurora's heart clenched as she recognized the imposing silhouette of the Dirassi mansion looming in the distance. It was a fortress, a symbol of power and wealth, but also a prison, a place of dark secrets and hidden dangers. As they approached, she could see the faint glow of lights in the windows, casting an eerie glow on the rain-slicked stone facade. The mansion had always intimidated her, even when she was a child. It was a place of opulent beauty, filled with priceless art and antique furniture, but it also felt cold, sterile, a place where emotions were suppressed, where loyalty was paramount, and where betrayal could be deadly. Tommaso parked the car in front of the massive, ornate doors. He turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Are you ready for this, Aurora?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been earlier. She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the imposing entrance. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. But she knew she had no choice. She had to face the ghosts of her past, the demons that had haunted her for decades. "No," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I don't have a choice, do I?" He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "No, you don't." He got out of the car and came around to open her door. As she stepped out, the cold night air hit her like a slap, the scent of rain and damp earth mingling with the familiar, yet unsettling, fragrance of the mansion's gardens. He offered her his arm, a silent gesture of support, of protection. Aurora hesitated for a moment, then, with a deep breath, she placed her hand on his arm. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a strange mix of fear and a long-dormant familiarity. They walked towards the entrance, their footsteps echoing on the stone pathway. As they approached the massive doors, they swung open, revealing a brightly lit hallway and a figure standing silhouetted in the doorway. It was Marco, her father's longtime majordomo, his face etched with worry and relief. He was an older man, his hair now completely white, his shoulders stooped with age, but his eyes still held the same unwavering loyalty that Aurora remembered. "Signorina Aurora," he said, his voice thick with emotion.
"We have been waiting for you."
He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect, but also of deference. Aurora felt a pang of guilt, realizing the burden she had placed on him, on all of them, by her sudden departure all those years ago. "Marco," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's good to see you." He straightened, a faint smile touching his lips. "And you, Signorina."
"And you."
He stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Aurora took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold, stepping back into the world she had tried so hard to escape. The heavy doors closed behind her with a resounding thud, sealing her fate. She was home. But it was a home filled with shadows, with secrets, and with the ever-present threat of danger. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that her life would never be the same. The air in the vast hallway was thick with unspoken tension. It felt like a prelude to something unavoidable, something dark. Chapter 3. A glimmer of truth in the darkness. The grand hall of the Dirassi mansion was a study in opulent, intimidating beauty. Marble floors gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers, reflecting the intricate frescoes that adorned the high ceilings. Family portraits, generations of Derasis with their stern faces and piercing eyes, line the walls, a silent testament to the family's long and often bloody history. Aurora felt their gazes upon her, judging, assessing, reminding her of the legacy she had abandoned and was now forced to confront. Marco led them through the familiar maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional muffled sound from within the closed rooms. The mansion felt empty, devoid of the life and laughter that Aurora vaguely remembered from her childhood. It was a mausoleum, a monument to a dying dynasty. Tommaso walked beside her, his presence a silent reassurance, a shield against the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume her. He seemed to sense her unease, his hand brushing against hers in a fleeting gesture of comfort. It was a small gesture, but it sent a warmth through her, a reminder that she was not entirely alone in this suffocating world. They reached a large, oak-paneled door, guarded by two men in dark suits. Aurora recognized them as members of her father's personal guard, their faces impassive, their eyes watchful. They nodded to Tommaso, a silent acknowledgement of his authority, and stepped aside to allow them entry. The room was a library, vast and dimly lit, the walls lined with shelves filled with leather-bound books. A fire crackled in the large hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, providing the only source of warmth in the otherwise cold and imposing space. A single figure stood silhouetted against the flickering flames, his back to the door. "Zio," Tommaso said, his voice respectful but firm. The figure turned, and Aurora's breath caught in her throat. It was her uncle, Riccardo Derasi, her father's younger brother. He was a man she had always distrusted, a man whose ambition was as boundless as his cruelty. He was older now, his face more lined, his hair thinner, but the calculating gleam in his eyes remained unchanged. "Tommaso," Riccardo said, his voice smooth and oily, like a snake slithering through the grass. "And Aurora, you finally decided to grace us with your presence." His gaze swept over her, dismissive, contemptuous. Aurora felt a surge of anger, a spark of the defiance that had been dormant for so long. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm here, Uncle," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And I want to know what's going on." Riccardo chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "So direct, just like your father. But unlike him, you lack the stomach for this life, don't you?" He gestured around the room, encompassing the entire mansion, the entire legacy of the Derasi family. "You ran away, abandoned your duty, your family, and now you expect to simply waltz back in and take control?" Aurora felt Tommaso tense beside her, his hand instinctively moving towards the inside of his jacket, where she knew he carried a weapon. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, a silent warning. She wouldn't let him fight her battles. She had to face this herself. "I came back because I was told my father was dead," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "I came back to find out the truth." Riccardo's smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "The truth? The truth is, Aurora, that your father was weak. He grew soft in his old age, lost his grip on the family. He made mistakes. Mistakes that cost him his life." He paused, letting the words sink in. Aurora felt a wave of nausea, a cold dread creeping up her spine. She had always known her father was a ruthless man, a man who lived by a brutal code, but to hear his death described so callously, so dismissively, filled her with a mixture of grief and rage. "What mistakes?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Riccardo stepped closer, his gaze locking with hers. "He trusted the wrong people," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He allowed enemies to infiltrate our ranks. He was betrayed, Aurora. Betrayed from within." The words hit her like a physical blow. Betrayal. It was a concept that was woven into the very fabric of the mafia world, a constant threat, a shadow that lurked in every corner. But to hear that her father, a man who had always prided himself on his ability to spot treachery, had been betrayed, was a devastating revelation. Who? she asked, her voice trembling. Who betrayed him? Ricardo's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold calculation. That, my dear niece, is something you need to discover for yourself. He turned away from her, walking towards a large, ornate desk that dominated one side of the room. He picked up a small, silver box, its surface intricately engraved with the Darasi family crest. Your father left this for you, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He said it contained the answers you seek. He held out the box to her. Aurora hesitated, her gaze shifting from the box to Ricardo's face. She didn't trust him. She knew he was manipulating her, playing a game, but she also knew that the box might hold the key to understanding her father's death, to uncovering the truth behind the betrayal. With a deep breath, she reached out and took the box. It was heavier than she expected, the cold metal sending a shiver through her. She looked at it, turning it over in her hands, tracing the familiar lines of the family crest. It was a symbol of her heritage, of the legacy she had tried to escape, but also a symbol of the burden she now carried. She looked up at Tommaso, her eyes seeking his reassurance, his guidance. He nodded slightly, his gaze unwavering. He was there for her, a silent promise of support, of protection. Aurora took another deep breath and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson velvet, lay a single, antique key and a folded piece of paper. It was the start, she knew, a glimmer of truth in the vast darkness that surrounded her. The key would open something important, she felt it. Chapter 4. The Unseen Bonds of Family. The key felt cold and heavy in Aurora's hand, its intricate design a testament to a craftsmanship long lost. It was old, undeniably so, the metal worn smooth in places, hinting at frequent use. The paper, equally aged, was yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. It was her father's handwriting, stark and angular, a style she recognized instantly, even after all these years. Before she could unfold the note, Ricardo's voice cut through the silence. I trust you'll find what you're looking for, Aurora. But be warned, the truth can be a dangerous thing. His words were laced with a veiled threat, a reminder of the treacherous world she had re-entered. Aurora ignored him, her focus entirely on the note in her hand. She carefully unfolded it, her heart pounding in her chest. The message was brief, cryptic, typical of her father. My dearest Aurora, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I have made mistakes, trusted the wrong people. The key unlocks the past, the truth you need to know.
Go to the villa.
The garden holds the answers. Trust no one, except Tommaso. He is your shield, your guide. He always has been. Remember who you are, Aurora. Remember the strength of the Darasi blood that flows through your veins. Forgive me, your father. The words were simple, yet they hit her with an emotional force that left her reeling. Grief, guilt, regret, and a flicker of anger washed over her. Grief for the father she had lost, guilt for abandoning him, regret for the years they had wasted, and anger at the betrayal that had led to his death. The mention of the villa, the family's secluded estate on the outskirts of Florence, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a place of both happy and painful memories, a place where she had spent her childhood summers, a place where she had first experienced the intoxicating and ultimately destructive power of the mafia world. The villa, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Tommaso, who had been standing silently beside her, observing her reaction, nodded. It's where your father spent most of his time in the last few years, he said, his voice low and reassuring. He felt safer there, away from the complexities of the city. Aurora looked up at him, her eyes searching his. He trusted you, she said, the words a statement, not a question. He trusted you completely. Tommaso met her gaze, his dark eyes unwavering. He did, he confirmed. And I will not betray that trust, Aurora. I will protect you, just as he asked. His words were a vow, a solemn promise that resonated with a sincerity that touched her deeply. She had always sensed a deep bond between Tommaso and her father, a bond that went beyond mere loyalty, a bond forged in shared experiences, in shared secrets. Ricardo, who had been watching their exchange with a cynical smile, cleared his throat. Sentimental drivel, he muttered. The villa is a relic, a crumbling reminder of a bygone era. There's nothing there but dust and memories. Aurora ignored him, her focus entirely on Tommaso. When can we go? She asked. Tommaso glanced at the grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the corner of the room. It was late, well past midnight. We can leave at first light, he said. It's best to travel under the cover of darkness. Aurora nodded, understanding the need for discretion. The Mafia world operated in the shadows, and any overt movement could attract unwanted attention, could expose them to danger. She turned to Marco, who had been standing silently by the door, his face etched with concern. Marco, she said, her voice soft. Thank you for everything. He bowed his head slightly, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and sadness. It is my honor to serve you, Signorina Aurora, he said. Your father would be proud. His words, though simple, brought a lump to her throat. She had spent so many years trying to escape her family, trying to deny her heritage, but hearing Marco's words, seeing the unwavering loyalty in his eyes, reminded her of the unseen bonds that still tied her to this world, to these people. She looked back at Tommaso, her eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. She was afraid, terrified even, but she also knew that she couldn't run anymore. She had to face the truth, whatever it may be. She had to uncover the secrets that had led to her father's death. She had to reclaim her legacy, not for power or ambition, but for justice, for closure, for the chance to finally forgive herself and her father. Let's go, she said, her voice firm, resolute. She wouldn't fail. As Tommaso led the way towards the exit and the awaiting car, a thought crossed her mind, a certainty. She would not go to the villa alone. Tommaso would be by her side, step for step. A De Rossi and a Benedetti, as the past had foreshadowed. The clock ticked onwards towards dawn. Chapter 5. Whispers of Betrayal and Loyalty. The drive to the villa was shrouded in a pre-dawn mist, the landscape a blur of muted grays and greens. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the stuffy, oppressive atmosphere of the city mansion. Aurora sat beside Tommaso, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. The silence in the car was less strained than before, a subtle shift in their dynamic. The initial shock of their reunion had begun to fade, replaced by a cautious understanding, a tentative rebuilding of the trust that had been shattered years ago. Aurora found herself studying Tommaso, noticing the subtle changes that time had wrought. The lines of fatigue around his eyes, the silver that now threaded through his dark hair, spoke of a life lived on the edge, a life of constant vigilance and hidden dangers. He drove with the same focused intensity she remembered, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the road, the surrounding landscape. He was a man who was always alert, always aware, a man who had learned to trust his instincts, to anticipate danger before it struck. Tell me about my father, Aurora said, breaking the silence, her voice low and hesitant. Tell me about the last few years. Tommaso glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He changed, Aurora, he said, his voice tinged with sadness. The business, it took its toll on him. He became more withdrawn, more isolated. He trusted fewer and fewer people. Except you, Aurora said, a statement, not a question. Tommaso nodded. He knew I would always be loyal, he said. I owed him everything. He gave me a life, a purpose. He paused, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He made enemies, Aurora. Powerful enemies. He was always a forceful man, but in the last few years, he became more reckless, more uncompromising. He alienated some of the other families, refused to negotiate, to compromise. And that's why he was killed? Aurora asked, her voice trembling. Tommaso hesitated, his gaze shifting back to the road. It's complicated, he said. There are many factors at play. Old rivalries, shifting alliances, new players seeking to gain power. Your father's death was a message. a warning to anyone who would challenge the established order. Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. The Mafia world was a complex web of power and intrigue, a world where loyalty and betrayal were two sides of the same coin, where alliances shifted like sand, and where violence was often the only language spoken. "And Ricardo?" she asked, her voice filled with suspicion. "What role did he play in all of this?" Tommaso's jaw tightened. "Ricardo is ambitious," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "He always has been. He coveted your father's position, resented his power. But he's also cautious. He wouldn't make a move unless he was sure of success. But he benefits from my father's death," Aurora pointed out. "He's now the acting head of the family, isn't he?" Tommaso nodded. "He is," he confirmed. "But that doesn't necessarily mean he was directly involved in your father's demise. The Mafia world is rarely that simple. There are often layers of deception, hidden agendas." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "We need to be careful, Aurora," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to trust our instincts, to question everything. We can't afford to make any mistakes." His words were a sobering reminder of the danger they faced. They were entering a world of shadows and lies, a world where enemies could lurk around every corner, where even the closest allies could be potential betrayers. The mist began to dissipate as the sun slowly rose, casting a pale golden light on the landscape. They were approaching the villa, its outline now visible in the distance, a sprawling, elegant structure nestled amidst rolling hills and vineyards. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, but Aurora knew that beneath the surface, darkness lurked. As they drove through the gates, she felt a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched. The villa was surrounded by a high stone wall, topped with wrought iron fencing, a clear indication of the need for security, for protection. The grounds were meticulously maintained, the gardens lush and vibrant, but there was an eerie silence, a sense of abandonment, that hung in the air. Tommaso parked the car in front of the main entrance, a massive, arched doorway flanked by two imposing stone lions. He got out and came around to open her door, his hand hovering protectively near her arm. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low and cautious. "And be careful what you say, what you do. We don't know who we can trust." Aurora nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She followed him towards the entrance, her senses on high alert, every rustle of leaves, every chirp of a bird, seeming to amplify the sense of danger that surrounded them. The whispers of betrayal and loyalty echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of the treacherous path they were about to tread. They stepped inside the villa's silent foyer. The air was noticeably colder. Chapter 6. The Weight of Unspoken Promises. The interior of the villa was a stark contrast to the vibrant gardens outside. Dust motes danced in the faint shafts of sunlight that pierced through the heavy, velvet curtains, illuminating the faded grandeur of the rooms. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, lingering trace of her father's favorite cigar smoke, a scent that brought a wave of unexpected grief crashing over Aurora. Furniture draped in white sheets stood like ghostly sentinels in the vast, silent rooms, giving the impression of a place frozen in time, abandoned in haste. The silence was even more profound than in the city mansion, a silence that spoke of secrets, of unspoken truths, of a life lived in isolation, in fear. Tommaso moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, his hand never far from the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. He was a predator in his natural habitat, alert, wary, ready to defend himself, and her, against any threat. "Your father spent most of his time in his study," Tommaso said, his voice a low murmur, breaking the oppressive silence. "It's where he felt most secure." He led her through a maze of corridors, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The villa was a labyrinth, a place of hidden passages and secret rooms, a testament to the paranoia and the need for secrecy that had defined her father's life. They reached a heavy, oak door, similar to the one in the city mansion, but this one was unmarked, unadorned. Tommaso paused, his hand resting on the ornate, brass doorknob. Be prepared, Aurora, he said, his voice soft but serious. This room, it holds his secrets. It may not be easy to see. Aurora nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay beyond the door. Tommaso turned the knob and pushed the door open, revealing a room bathed in the soft, diffused light of the early morning sun. The study was smaller than the one in the city mansion, more intimate, more personal. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes, many of them ancient, their spines worn with age. A large, mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with papers, documents, and a scattering of personal items. Aurora's gaze was immediately drawn to a framed photograph on the desk, a picture of her and her father, taken many years ago, when she was still a young girl. He was smiling, a rare and genuine smile, his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. It was a reminder of a happier time, a time before the darkness had consumed their lives. She walked towards the desk, her fingers tracing the outline of the frame, a wave of bittersweet nostalgia washing over her. She picked up the photograph, studying her father's face, searching for clues, for answers, for some understanding of the man he had become. Tommaso moved to the desk, his gaze sweeping over the scattered papers, the various objects. He picked up a small, silver letter opener, its handle shaped like a serpent, a symbol of the Derossi family. He was meticulous, Tommaso said, his voice low and thoughtful. He kept records of everything. His transactions, his alliances, his enemies. He opened a drawer, revealing a stack of files, neatly organized and labeled. He began to sift through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. Aurora continued to explore the room, her gaze drawn to a small, antique writing desk tucked away in a corner. It was a beautiful piece, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, its surface polished to a mirror sheen.
She remembered this desk.
It had belonged to her mother, a woman she had barely known, a woman who had died when Aurora was still a child. The desk had always been off-limits, a sacred object, a reminder of a lost love, a lost innocence. She reached out, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings, the delicate inlay. She felt a connection to her mother, a woman she had only known through stories and faded photographs, a woman who had also been trapped in this world, a world of violence and betrayal. As she touched the desk, she felt a slight give, a subtle shift in the wood. She pressed again, and a small, hidden compartment sprang open, revealing a velvet-lined recess. Inside lay a single, leather-bound diary, its cover embossed with her mother's initials. Aurora's heart skipped a beat. She carefully lifted the diary, her hands trembling. It was a treasure, a hidden legacy, a voice from the past. She opened it, her eyes scanning the delicate, flowing script, the faded ink. It was her mother's diary, a record of her thoughts, her feelings, her fears. A sudden noise from behind made her jump. Tommaso was standing by the window, his body tense, his gaze fixed on something outside. "What is it?" Aurora asked, her voice filled with alarm. Tommaso held up a hand, silencing her. He slowly drew his weapon, his eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. "Someone's here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Someone's watching us." The weight of unspoken promises hung heavy in the air. The villa and its secrets were not as safe as they needed it to be. Danger was coming, and it was creeping fast. Chapter 7. A dance of fear and desire. The realization that they were not alone sent a jolt of adrenaline through Aurora. The fragile sense of security she had briefly felt within the villa's walls shattered, replaced by a primal fear. She instinctively moved closer to Tommaso, seeking his protection, his strength. He stood silhouetted against the window, his body a taut, coiled spring, ready to strike. The sunlight glinted off the polished steel of his weapon, a stark reminder of the violence that was always lurking beneath the surface of their world.
"How many?"
Aurora whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. "I can't tell," Tommaso replied, his gaze still fixed on the grounds outside. "But they're being careful. They know we're here." He slowly lowered the weapon, but his body remained tense, alert. He turned to Aurora, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of concern and a fierce determination. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're exposed here. We need to find a more secure location." Aurora nodded, her mind racing. She quickly closed her mother's diary, tucking it inside her jacket, close to her heart. It was a precious link to her past, a source of potential answers, and she wouldn't risk losing it. Tommaso took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, a strange mix of fear and a long-dormant desire. She had tried to forget the feelings he had once stirred within her, the forbidden attraction that had blossomed in the shadows of their dangerous world. But being close to him now, relying on him for protection, for survival, brought those feelings rushing back, stronger than ever. They moved quickly and quietly through the villa, retracing their steps, their senses on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, sent a shiver of apprehension down Aurora's spine. They were being hunted, and they knew that their pursuers were likely skilled, ruthless, and determined to silence them. Tommaso led her through a hidden passage behind a bookcase in the library, a secret exit that her father had used for discreet departures. The passage was narrow and dark, the air thick with the scent of dust and damp earth. It led to a small, hidden door that opened onto the back of the villa, near the sprawling gardens. As they emerged into the sunlight, Aurora felt a momentary sense of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of vulnerability. The gardens, once a place of beauty and tranquility, now seemed menacing, filled with potential hiding places for their enemies. Tommaso scanned the surroundings, his eyes narrowed, his hand still gripping hers. "We need to get to the car," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's our only chance." They moved quickly and silently through the gardens, keeping to the shadows, using the dense foliage for cover. The air was thick with tension, with the unspoken fear that hung between them. Aurora could feel Tommaso's body tense beside her, his muscles coiled, ready to react to any threat. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, the sharp crack of a twig snapping underfoot. Tommaso instantly pushed Aurora behind him, shielding her with his body, his weapon raised, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the dappled sunlight. He held a gun in his hand, pointed directly at them. "Don't move, Benedetti," the man said, his voice cold and menacing. "It's over." Aurora's heart leaped into her throat. She felt a wave of despair, a sense of inevitability. They were trapped, cornered, with no way out. But Tommaso didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his body shielding Aurora's, his gaze fixed on the man with the gun. "Who are you?" Tommaso asked, his voice calm and controlled, betraying none of the fear that Aurora knew he must be feeling.
Who sent you?
The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound.
"That's not important," he said.
"What's important is that you and the Signorina are going to disappear."
Permanently.
He took a step closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. Aurora closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. She felt Tommaso's hand squeeze hers, a silent farewell, a last gesture of protection. But then something unexpected happened. A second figure emerged from the shadows, moving with lightning speed, tackling the man with the gun from behind. The gun went off, the bullet whizzing harmlessly into the air. Aurora opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw Tommaso struggling with the first man, while the second figure, a smaller, more agile form, wrestled the gun away from him. As the second figure straightened, Aurora's breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, her face familiar, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. It was Isabella, one of the house staff from the city mansion. She raised the gun and pointed at the man. Isabella looked determined, dangerous, and surprisingly in control. The dance of fear and desire had a dangerous audience and unknown allegiances. Chapter 8. Echoes of a Lost Innocence. Isabella's unexpected arrival was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The man, disarmed and clearly surprised, was quickly subdued by Tommaso, his hands bound with a length of rope that Isabella produced from seemingly nowhere. The tension, though still palpable, shifted. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the underlying questions remained, now compounded by Isabella's presence. "Isabella?" Aurora asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and relief.
What?
"How did you?" Isabella, her chest heaving slightly from the exertion, offered a tight smile. "I followed you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I knew you would be in danger." Her gaze shifted to Tommaso, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Marco sent me," she added. "He trusts me. He knew you would need extra protection." Tommaso, his expression still guarded, nodded slowly. He had regained his composure, the brief struggle leaving him unfazed. He studied Isabella, assessing her, trying to gauge her motives, her loyalty. "You took a risk," he said, his voice neutral. "A big risk." Isabella shrugged, a hint of defiance in her posture. "I did what I had to do," she said. "I owe your family everything." Aurora felt a surge of gratitude towards Isabella, but also a nagging sense of unease. She knew that in the mafia world, loyalty was a complex and often fragile thing, easily broken, easily betrayed. She couldn't help but wonder what Isabella's true motives were, what she expected in return for her assistance. They moved quickly, leaving the bound man hidden amongst the dense foliage of the garden, with a promise from Isabella that the proper channels, whoever they may be, would pick him up. Tommaso, his usual caution heightened, decided they needed to leave the villa immediately. It was compromised, no longer safe. As they drove away, Aurora couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense that they were still in danger. She glanced at Tommaso, his profile etched against the fading light, his expression unreadable. "Do you trust her?" Aurora asked, her voice low, hesitant. Tommaso hesitated, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I trust Marco," he said finally. "And if Marco trusts her, then I will give her the benefit of the doubt. But we need to be careful, Aurora. We can't afford to trust anyone completely." His words were a sobering reminder of the precariousness of their situation. They were surrounded by enemies, by potential betrayers, and they had to rely on their instincts, on their own judgment, to survive. Isabella in the back seat was quiet and simply nodded to Tommaso's remark. The conversation died out. Aurora opened her mother's diary, her fingers tracing the faded inscription on the cover. She began to read, her heart pounding in her chest, hoping to find some answers, some clues, to the mystery that surrounded her father's death, her mother's own tragic end. The diary entries were a window into her mother's soul, a glimpse into a life lived in the shadows, a life of quiet desperation and unspoken fears. She wrote of her love for Aurora's father, a love that was both passionate and consuming, but also of her growing disillusionment with the mafia world, with the violence and the brutality that defined it. She wrote of her fears for Aurora, her desire to protect her from the darkness, to give her a different life, a life of freedom and innocence. She wrote of secrets, of hidden truths, of a growing sense of unease, of a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. As Aurora read, she felt a growing connection to her mother, a woman she had barely known, but whose spirit, whose strength, she now felt flowing through her veins. She realized that her mother had been a prisoner in her own life, trapped by the constraints of the mafia code, by the expectations of her family. One entry, in particular, caught Aurora's attention. It was dated just a few weeks before her mother's death. "I fear for Alessandro," she wrote. "He has made enemies, powerful enemies. He is becoming increasingly reckless, obsessed with power. He trusts no one, except Tommaso. I fear for our daughter, for her future. I have discovered something terrible, something that could destroy everything. I must find a way to protect her, to get her away from this darkness." Aurora's heart skipped a beat. What had her mother discovered? What was the terrible secret that had threatened to destroy everything? Was it connected to her father's death? Was it connected to the key, to the villa? She looked up at Tommaso, her eyes filled with questions, with a growing sense of urgency. My mother, she said, her voice trembling. She knew something. Something dangerous. Something that she was afraid of. Tommaso met her gaze, his expression somber. He had been listening, following her every move. We need to find out what it was, he said, his voice firm, resolute. It may be the key to understanding everything. He reached out, his hand covering hers, his touch sending a familiar warmth through her. We'll find the answers, Aurora, he said, his voice soft, reassuring. Together. The echoes of a lost innocence faded into a determined silence. The diary was a start, but where would it lead? And could they handle the weight of the truth? They arrived at a small, unassuming apartment building. It was nondescript and not at all lavish, like the family's other properties. This was going to be their new sanctuary for however long it would last. Chapter 9. The cracks in the foundation. The apartment was a stark contrast to the opulence of the de Rossi mansions. It was small, sparsely furnished, but clean and functional. It was clearly a safe house, a place used for discreet meetings, for hiding, for escaping the scrutiny of the outside world. The walls were thick, the windows reinforced, the doors equipped with multiple locks. It was a place designed for survival, not for comfort. Isabella, who had remained silent during the drive, surveyed the apartment with a practiced eye, checking the windows, the doors, the security measures. She seemed to know her way around, familiar with the layout, the protocols. It's secure, she said, her voice matter-of-fact. But we shouldn't stay here too long. They'll be looking for you. Tommaso nodded, his expression grim. He had already begun to make calls, his voice low and urgent, speaking in a coded language that Aurora didn't understand. He was arranging for transportation, for supplies, for a plan of action. Aurora, feeling a sense of helplessness, sat down on the small, worn sofa, her mother's diary clutched in her hand. She felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The events of the past few days had taken their toll, leaving her feeling drained, vulnerable. She opened the diary again, her eyes scanning the pages, searching for more clues, for more answers. She read of her mother's growing fear, her increasing isolation, her desperate attempts to find a way out, to protect her daughter from the clutches of the mafia world. She came across another entry, one that made her heart stop. I've spoken to Riccardo, her mother wrote. I told him what I know. He promised to help me, to help us escape. But I don't trust him. I see the hunger in his eyes, the ambition. He is a dangerous man, a snake in the grass. I fear I have made a mistake. Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. Her mother had confided in Riccardo, the very man who now stood to gain the most from her father's death, the very man Aurora suspected of being involved in the betrayal. Had her mother unwittingly sealed her own fate, and her father's, by seeking Riccardo's help? She looked up at Tommaso, who had finished his calls and was now watching her, his expression concerned. My mother, she spoke to Riccardo, Aurora said, her voice trembling. She told him about the secret she had discovered. She thought he would help her, but she was afraid of him. Tommaso's jaw tightened. He walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the sofa, his presence a source of comfort, of strength. Riccardo is a cunning man, he said, his voice low and grave. He's always been ambitious, always craved power. He would have seen your mother's knowledge as a threat, an opportunity. You think he killed her? Aurora asked, the words a whisper, a question she had been dreading to voice. Tommaso hesitated, his gaze meeting hers. I don't know, Aurora, he said honestly. But it's a possibility. A strong possibility. The thought was almost unbearable. The idea that her uncle, a man she had known all her life, a member of her own family, could have been responsible for her mother's death, and possibly her father's, filled her with a rage she had never felt before. She looked back at the diary, her eyes scanning the pages, searching for more clues, for any hint of what her mother had discovered, what had made her so afraid. She found a small, folded piece of paper tucked inside the back cover of the diary. It was a map, a hand-drawn map of the villa grounds, with a specific location marked with an X. The location was in the garden, near the old, abandoned greenhouse, a place Aurora remembered from her childhood, a place she had always been forbidden to go. She showed the map to Tommaso, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you think it means?" she asked. Tommaso studied the map, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a hiding place," he said finally. "Something is buried there. Something your mother wanted to keep hidden." He looked at Aurora, his eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "We need to go back to the villa," he said. "We need to find out what's buried there." Aurora knew he was right. The map was a clue, a potential breakthrough, a chance to finally uncover the truth. But she also knew that returning to the villa was dangerous, that they were walking into a trap. She looked at Isabella, who had been standing silently by the window, watching them. "Can we trust you, Isabella?" Aurora asked, her voice direct, challenging. "Can we really trust you?" Isabella met her gaze, her expression unwavering. "You can," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "I swear on my life." Aurora studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of betrayal. She saw nothing but sincerity, a fierce loyalty that seemed to burn in her eyes. "All right," Aurora agreed, a hint of defiance in her tone. "Let's go back." The foundation of their makeshift sanctuary and their quickly formed plan was cracking under the weight of secrets and suspicions. The truth, it appeared, was buried deep, and they would have to risk everything to unearth it. The clock on the wall was ticking faster. Chapter 10. A fragile trust begins to form. The return to the villa was a tense, silent affair. The sun had begun to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the landscape, mirroring the growing sense of dread that filled Aurora's heart. They traveled in a different car, an unassuming sedan that Isabella had procured, a vehicle less likely to attract attention than Tommaso's sleek, black sports car. Tommaso drove with a focused intensity, his eyes constantly scanning the road, the surrounding countryside. He was taking no chances, varying their route, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the back alleys and less traveled paths. Isabella sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery, her expression unreadable. She had remained surprisingly quiet since their decision to return to the villa, her earlier confidence replaced by a watchful silence. Aurora sat beside Tommaso, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mother's diary and the map tucked safely inside her jacket. She felt a mixture of fear and determination, a sense of urgency that propelled her forward, despite the risks. She glanced at Tommaso, his profile etched against the fading light. She had placed her trust in him, relied on him for protection, for guidance. But she also knew that he was a man of secrets, a man who had lived his entire life in the shadows of the mafia world. She wondered what he wasn't telling her, what he was holding back. "Tommaso," she said, her voice low, hesitant. "What aren't you telling me?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "What makes you think I'm hiding something?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "You're always so guarded," Aurora said. "You reveal so little. I know there's more to you, more to this situation, than you're letting on." He sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "There are things, Aurora," he admitted. "Things that are difficult to explain. Things that are better left unsaid." "But I need to know," Aurora insisted. "I need to understand everything. I can't make informed decisions. I can't protect myself if I'm kept in the dark." He hesitated, his gaze shifting back to the road. "Some things are dangerous, Aurora," he said. "Some knowledge can be a burden, a curse." "I'm not afraid of the truth," Aurora said, her voice firm, resolute. "I'm more afraid of the lies, of the secrets, of the unknown." He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're strong, Aurora," he said. "Stronger than you know. But strength can be a double-edged sword. It can protect you, but it can also make you a target." He paused, his gaze returning to the road. "I will tell you what I can," he said finally. "But I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that I'm doing everything I can to protect you." His words were a plea, a request for understanding, for acceptance. Aurora felt a flicker of warmth towards him, a sense of connection, of shared vulnerability. She had seen glimpses of the man beneath the hardened exterior, the man who had cared for a wounded bird, the man who had mourned her father's death, the man who was now risking his life to protect her. "I do trust you, Tommaso," she said, her voice soft, sincere. "But trust is earned, not given. And I need you to earn mine." He nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "I understand," he said. "And I will." The conversation, though brief, had eased some of the tension between them, creating a fragile bond, a tentative understanding. Aurora felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could overcome the challenges ahead, that they could uncover the truth, together. They reached the villa under the cover of darkness, the imposing structure looming before them, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. The grounds were deserted, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets. Tommaso parked the car a distance away, hidden amongst the trees, ensuring they wouldn't be easily discovered. They moved quickly and quietly towards the old, abandoned greenhouse, Isabella leading the way, her movements sure and confident. The greenhouse was a dilapidated structure, its glass panes broken and cracked, its metal frame rusted and decaying. It was a relic of a bygone era, a place of forgotten beauty, of lost innocence. Aurora felt a pang of sadness as she looked at the greenhouse, remembering the times she had played there as a child, exploring its hidden corners, imagining it as a magical kingdom. It was a place of happy memories, now tainted by the darkness that surrounded them. Isabella located the spot marked on the map, a small patch of earth near the back wall of the greenhouse. Tommaso produced a small shovel from the trunk of the car, and they began to dig, their movements silent and efficient. The earth was soft and damp, yielding easily to their efforts. As they dug deeper, Aurora felt a growing sense of anticipation, a sense of dread. She knew that they were about to uncover something significant, something that could change everything. The fragile trust they were beginning to build was about to be tested. The soil gave way to something hard. Chapter 11. The Unveiling of Hidden Scars. The shovel struck something hard, a dull thud that resonated in the quiet night. Tommaso stopped digging, his body tense, his eyes alert. He knelt down, carefully clearing away the remaining soil with his hands. A small, wooden box emerged from the earth, its surface covered in dirt and grime. It was old, the wood weathered and cracked, but it was surprisingly intact. It was locked, secured with a small, rusty padlock. Aurora's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. This was the secret her mother had hidden, the truth she had died to protect. Tommaso looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Are you ready for this, Aurora?" he asked, his voice low and serious. She nodded, her throat dry, her hands trembling. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. But she had to know. She had to face the truth, whatever it may be. Tommaso produced a small, lock-picking kit from his pocket, a skill honed from years of navigating the treacherous underworld. He worked quickly and efficiently, his movements precise and practiced. The lock clicked open, the rusty mechanism protesting with a grating squeak. He lifted the lid of the box, revealing its contents. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of documents, photographs, and a small, antique pistol. Aurora's breath caught in her throat. She reached out, her fingers carefully lifting the documents, her eyes scanning the faded ink, the yellowed paper. They were letters, correspondence between her mother and various individuals, some of whom she recognized, some of whom were unknown to her. The letters spoke of a conspiracy, a plot to overthrow her father, to seize control of the Derossi family. They implicated several prominent members of the mafia, including, to Aurora's horror, her own uncle, Riccardo. The photographs were even more damning. They showed Riccardo meeting with rival family members, exchanging money, making deals. They showed him with the man who had attacked them in the garden, the man Isabella had subdued. The pistol was a small, elegant weapon, its handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl. It was the same pistol her mother always carried in her purse. It was clear to Aurora that her mother knew of the betrayal, documented everything. Aurora felt a wave of nausea, a cold dread creeping up her spine. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Her uncle, the man she had trusted, the man who had claimed to be protecting her, had been plotting against her father all along. He had orchestrated his murder, and he had likely been responsible for her mother's death as well. She looked up at Tommaso, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and despair. "He killed them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He killed them both." Tommaso nodded, his expression grim. He had been examining the documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The evidence is compelling," he said, "but it's not conclusive. We need more. We need proof that will stand up in our world." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "We need to find someone who can corroborate this," he said. "Someone who was involved, someone who knows the truth." Aurora thought for a moment, her mind racing. She remembered a name that had appeared several times in her mother's letters, a name that had also been mentioned by her father in his note. Enzo Salvatore.
Enzo Salvatore, she said. "My mother wrote about him."
She said, "He was a close confidant of my father's, that he knew everything." Tommaso's eyes widened. "Salvatore," he said, his voice thoughtful. "He was your father's consigliere, his most trusted advisor. He disappeared after your father's death. Everyone assumed he was dead. But what if he's not?" Aurora asked, a flicker of hope in her voice. "What if he's in hiding? What if he knows the truth?" Tommaso nodded. "It's a possibility," he said. "A long shot, but a possibility." He looked at Isabella, who had been standing silently by, observing their exchange. "Isabella," he said, "do you know anything about Enzo Salvatore?" Isabella hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "I heard rumors," she said. "Whispers that he was still alive, that he was being protected by someone." "Who?" Tommaso asked, his voice urgent. Isabella shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "It was just gossip. Nothing concrete." But Aurora could see in her eyes that she knew more than she was letting on. There was a flicker of fear, of uncertainty, that betrayed her carefully constructed facade. "Isabella," Aurora said, her voice firm, challenging. "You know something. Tell us. We need your help." Isabella looked at her, her gaze unwavering. She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. "There's a woman," she said finally, her voice low and hesitant. "An old woman who lives in the mountains. They say she knows everything. They say she protects the secrets of the families. Her name," Isabella continued, "is Nonna Amelia." The unveiling of hidden scars had led them to a new path, a new hope, but also a new danger. The old woman, Nonna Amelia, could be their salvation or their doom. The night was far from over. Chapter 12. The Price of Protection. The journey to Nonna Amelia's was arduous, a winding climb up treacherous mountain roads, the air growing colder with each passing mile. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their discovery heavy on their minds. The landscape was stark and beautiful, the rugged mountains casting long shadows in the moonlight, a reflection of the dangerous path they were treading. Aurora clutched the box containing the evidence, her fingers tracing the contours of the wood, the cold metal of the lock. It was a tangible link to her parents, to their tragic fate, and she was determined to see justice done, to avenge their deaths. She glanced at Tommaso, his profile etched against the moonlit sky, his expression unreadable. She knew he was carrying his own burdens, his own secrets. He had been loyal to her father, had protected her, but she also knew that he was a man of the mafia, a man who had lived by a brutal code, a man who had likely committed acts of violence himself. "Tommaso," she said, her voice low, hesitant. "What will happen when this is over? When we find the truth?" He glanced at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I don't know, Aurora," he said, honestly. "The mafia world, it doesn't offer happy endings. There's always a price to pay. But what about us?" She asked, the question a whisper, a plea. She had allowed herself to feel something for him, a connection that went beyond mere gratitude, beyond mere protection. She had glimpsed the man beneath the hardened exterior, the man who is capable of tenderness, of compassion. He hesitated, his gaze shifting back to the road. "We are different, Aurora," he said. We come from different worlds. Our paths, they were never meant to cross for long. His words were a rejection, a dismissal, but Aurora refused to accept them. She had seen the flicker of desire in his eyes, the subtle gestures of affection, the way he protected her, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. But we have crossed paths, she said, her voice firm, challenging. And we've changed each other. We've seen each other's vulnerabilities, our strengths. We can't just go back to the way things were. He sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. It's not that simple, Aurora, he said. The Mafia, it's a part of me. It's in my blood. I can't just walk away. But you could choose to, Aurora insisted. You could choose a different life. A life with me. He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a longing that mirrored her own. And what about you, Aurora? He asked. Could you choose a life with me? Could you accept the darkness that surrounds me, the dangers that will always be a part of my world? His words were a challenge, a test. Aurora knew that he was right. A life with Tommaso would never be easy, never be safe. It would be a life lived on the edge, a life of constant vigilance, of hidden threats. But she also knew that she couldn't go back to her old life, to the quiet anonymity she had so carefully constructed. She had been changed by this experience, by the discovery of her family's secrets, by her growing feelings for Tommaso. I don't know, she admitted, her voice honest, vulnerable. But I'm willing to try. If you are. He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions, with the weight of their uncertain future. They reached Nana Amelia's dwelling as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky with hues of pink and gold. It was a small, stone cottage, nestled amongst the rugged peaks, its windows dark and unwelcoming. It looked ancient, as if it had been carved from the very mountainside itself. Isabella, who had been guiding them, pointed towards the cottage. She's there, she said, her voice hushed, respectful. But be warned, she doesn't see just anyone. She chooses who she helps. Tommaso parked the car a distance away, hidden amongst the trees. They approached the cottage on foot, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine. As they reached the door, it creaked open, revealing a tiny, wizened woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes as sharp and bright as a hawk's. She was dressed in simple, black clothing, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. You seek answers, Nana Amelia said, her voice raspy but strong. You seek justice. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. The old woman seemed to know their purpose, their secrets, their fears. We do, Tommaso said, his voice respectful, deferential. We need your help. Nana Amelia studied them for a moment, her gaze piercing, assessing. She seemed to look beyond their physical appearances, into their very souls. The price of protection is high, she said finally, her voice echoing in the stillness of the morning. Are you willing to pay it? Aurora and Tommaso exchanged a look. They knew what she meant. The truth, justice, it always came at a cost. And in the mafia world, that cost was often paid in blood. They were both silent, in their own minds. The price might be steep, but it was time. Chapter 13. Facing the ghosts of yesterday. Nana Amelia led them inside the cottage, the interior surprisingly warm and cozy, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving landscape outside. A fire crackled in a small hearth, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls, illuminating the simple furnishings. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wood smoke, a comforting, almost mystical aroma. The old woman gestured for them to sit on rough-hewn wooden stools near the fire. She sat opposite them, her gaze unwavering, her presence both intimidating and strangely comforting. She was a repository of secrets, a guardian of the old ways, a woman who held the power to help them, or to destroy them. You seek justice for Alessandro de Rossi, Nana Amelia said, her voice a low, raspy whisper. And for his wife, Eleonora. Aurora's breath caught in her throat. Hearing her mother's name spoken aloud, in this place, by this woman, sent a shiver down her spine. Yes, Tommaso said, his voice firm, resolute. We have evidence that Riccardo de Rossi was responsible for their deaths. He placed the wooden box on the floor, in front of Nonna Emilia. She looked at it, her eyes narrowed, but she didn't touch it. Riccardo is a snake, she said, her voice filled with contempt. He has always coveted power, always lusted after what was not his. She looked at Aurora, her gaze softening slightly. Your mother was a good woman, she said. A kind soul, trapped in a world of darkness. She sought to protect you, to shield you from the evil that surrounded her. Aurora felt tears welling up in her eyes. Hearing these words from Nonna Emilia, a woman who had known her mother, who understood the challenges she had faced, brought a sense of closure, a sense of peace. We have proof, Aurora said, her voice trembling. Letters, photographs, a confession. We believe Riccardo orchestrated their murders. Nonna Emilia nodded slowly. I know of Riccardo's treachery, she said. I have seen it with my own eyes. But the mafia world, it demands more than just evidence. It demands witnesses. It demands action. We were hoping you could help us, Tommaso said. We were told you know everyone. Everything. Nonna Emilia smiled, a faint, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. I know many things, she said. But knowledge is a burden, a responsibility. I do not share it lightly. She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze piercing, assessing. You are all marked by this life, she said. You, Tommaso, carry the weight of your loyalty, your actions. You, Isabella, carry the burden of your secrets, your past. And you, Aurora, carry the legacy of your family, the blood of the de Rossis. She paused, her gaze settling on Aurora. You have a choice, Aurora, she said. You can walk away. You can return to your quiet life, your books, your anonymity. Or you can embrace your heritage, your power, and seek justice for your parents. Aurora felt a surge of determination, a resolve that hardened her spine. She had come too far, risked too much, to turn back now. She wouldn't abandon her parents' memory, wouldn't let their killer go unpunished. I will not walk away, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. I will see justice done, no matter the cost. Nonna Emilia nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Then I will help you, she said. I will tell you what you need to know. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Enzo Salvatore is alive, she said. He is in hiding, protected by a network of loyalists, those who still believe in the old ways, in the code of honor. Where is he? Tommaso asked, his voice urgent. Nonna Emilia smiled again, that same knowing smile. He is closer than you think, she said. He is waiting for you. But he will only reveal himself to those who are worthy, to those who are willing to fight for justice. She looked at each of them again. Go back to the villa, she instructed. To the place where it all began. He will find you there. But be warned, she added, her voice turning serious. Riccardo knows you're seeking the truth. He will not hesitate to silence you, to eliminate anyone who stands in his way. Her words were a chilling reminder of the danger they faced. They were walking into a trap, a confrontation that could cost them their lives. As the trio began to leave, Nonna Emilia called out, Aurora. Aurora turned back to her. Wear this, child. For protection. Nonna Emilia handed her a small, silver amulet, etched with a symbol of protection. It was your mother's. Aurora took the amulet, her fingers tracing the intricate design. She could feel the power and a strange warmth. Thank you, Aurora said, humbled. They left the cottage, the rising sun casting long shadows across the mountains, illuminating the treacherous path ahead. They were armed with knowledge, with a renewed sense of purpose, but also with the chilling awareness that their confrontation with Riccardo was inevitable and that the price of protection, the price of justice, could be their very lives. But they were ready. Chapter 14. The storm within and without. The atmosphere in the car was thick with tension, a palpable sense of anticipation and dread. The sun had fully risen, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the landscape, mirroring the stark reality of their situation. They were returning to the villa, to the lion's den, to confront Ricardo, armed with the knowledge Nana Emilia had given them, but also with the chilling awareness of the danger they faced. Aurora clutched the silver amulet, her mother's amulet, in her hand, its cool metal a source of comfort, a tangible link to her past, to her heritage. She felt a surge of strength, a resolve that hardened her spine. She wouldn't be intimidated, wouldn't be silenced. She would face Ricardo, and she would demand justice for her parents. She glanced at Tommaso, his profile etched against the bright sunlight, his expression unreadable. He was driving with his usual focused intensity, his eyes constantly scanning the road, the surrounding countryside. He was a warrior, preparing for battle, his body tense, his senses alert. "Tommaso," she said, her voice low, hesitant. "What will we do when we find Salvatore? How will we convince him to testify against Ricardo?" Tommaso hesitated, his gaze shifting back to the road. "Salvatore is a man of honor," he said. "He was loyal to your father, to the old ways. If he believes we are seeking justice, if he believes we are worthy, he will help us. But what if he doesn't?" Aurora asked, her voice filled with doubt. "What if he refuses to get involved? What if he's afraid?" Tommaso sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Then we'll have to find another way," he said. "We'll have to use the evidence we have, the letters, the photographs, to expose Ricardo, to turn the other families against him." "But that's risky," Aurora said. "Ricardo is powerful, influential. He has allies, connections. He could easily discredit us, silence us." Tommaso nodded, his expression grim. "I know," he said, "but we have no choice. We have to fight. We have to take the risk." Isabella, who had been silent throughout the journey, spoke up from the back seat. "There might be another way," she said, her voice hesitant, uncertain. Aurora and Tommaso turned to look at her, their expressions questioning. "What do you mean?" Tommaso asked, his voice sharp, probing. Isabella hesitated, her gaze shifting between them.
"There's a man," she said.
"A man who works for Ricardo. He's dissatisfied. He feels betrayed by Ricardo, by the way he's been treated." "Who is he?" Aurora asked, her voice filled with hope. "What's his name?" "His name is Giovanni," Isabella said. "He's one of Ricardo's enforcers. He's been with the family for years. But he's disillusioned. He's seen too much, done too much. He wants out. And you think he would help us?" Tommaso asked, his voice skeptical. Isabella nodded. "I think so," she said. "I've spoken to him. He trusts me. He knows I'm loyal to the old ways." "But can we trust him?" Aurora asked, her voice filled with doubt. "He works for Ricardo. He could be setting us up, leading us into a trap." Isabella met her gaze, her expression unwavering. "I believe him," she said. "I trust my instincts. And my instincts tell me he's genuine." Tommaso considered her words, his brow furrowed in thought. He knew that trusting Giovanni was a risk, a gamble. But they were running out of options, running out of time. "All right," he said finally. "We'll try it. We'll contact Giovanni. But we'll be careful. We won't reveal everything. We'll test him, see if he's truly willing to help us." He looked at Aurora, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and concern. "We're in this together, Aurora," he said. "We'll face this together. We'll get through this together."
His words were a promise, a vow.
Aurora felt a surge of warmth towards him, a sense of connection, of shared purpose. She had placed her trust in him, and he had not betrayed her. He was her protector, her ally, and she realized something more. As they approached the villa, the sky darkened, the clouds gathering overhead, mirroring the storm that was brewing within them, the storm that was about to break. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees, creating an eerie, unsettling sound. The villa loomed before them, a dark and menacing silhouette against the stormy sky. They parked the car a distance away, hidden amongst the trees, just as they had done before. They moved quickly and quietly towards the villa, their senses on high alert, their bodies tense, ready for anything. The storm within and the storm without were about to collide. The villa, once quiet and haunting, would soon host a confrontation. Chapter 15. A Moment of Reckoning. They entered the villa through the same hidden passage they had used before, the narrow, dark corridor feeling even more claustrophobic, more ominous, in the gathering storm. The air was thick with the scent of dust and damp earth, and a strange, metallic tang that Aurora couldn't quite place. Tommaso led the way, his hand gripping his weapon, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows, his body tense, alert. Isabella followed close behind, her movements silent and graceful, her expression unreadable. Aurora brought up the rear, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. They reached the library, the scene of their previous encounter with Ricardo, the room where the secrets of the Derossi family had begun to unravel. The room was dimly lit, the heavy curtains drawn, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, providing little warmth, little light. As they stepped into the room, they heard a sound, a muffled groan coming from behind the large, mahogany desk. Tommaso moved quickly and silently, his weapon raised, his body shielding Aurora's. He rounded the desk, and Aurora gasped. Lying on the floor, bound and gagged, was Giovanni, Isabella's contact, the man who was supposed to help them. He was bruised and battered, his face swollen and bloody, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pain. Ricardo, Giovanni mumbled through the gag, his voice strained, desperate. He knows everything. Tommaso quickly removed the gag, his expression grim. What happened? He asked, his voice urgent. What did he do to you? Giovanni struggled to speak, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He intercepted our communication, he said. He knew we were meeting.
He tortured me.
He wanted to know who I was working with. Did you tell him? Aurora asked, her voice filled with dread. Giovanni shook his head, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. No, he whispered. I didn't tell him anything. I swore I wouldn't betray you. Aurora felt a surge of relief, but also a growing sense of urgency. Ricardo knew they were there, knew they were a threat. He would be coming for them, and he wouldn't hesitate to kill them. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice trembling.
We need to leave now.
But Tommaso shook his head.
It's too late, he said.
He'll be expecting us to run. He'll have men watching the exits, the roads. We're trapped. He looked at Giovanni, his expression hardening. Where is he? He asked. Where's Ricardo? Giovanni hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. He's in the study, he whispered. His father's study. He's waiting for you. Tommaso nodded, his jaw tightening. He knew this was a trap, a showdown. Ricardo was calling them out, challenging them. He was confident, arrogant, believing he had the upper hand. Stay here, Tommaso said to Aurora and Isabella. Protect Giovanni. I'll go to him. But Aurora shook her head. No, she said, her voice firm, resolute. I'm going with you. This is my fight, too. I won't hide in the shadows any longer. Tommaso looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew he couldn't stop her, couldn't dissuade her. She was a Derossi, and she would face her destiny, head on. All right, he said finally. But stay close to me. And be ready for anything. He turned to Isabella. Protect Giovanni, he repeated. If anything happens to us, get him out of here. Get him to safety. Isabella nodded, her expression determined. I will, she said. I swear it. Tommaso and Aurora moved towards the study, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor, the silence broken only by the crackling of the dying fire, the distant rumble of thunder. The storm outside was intensifying, mirroring the turmoil within them, the storm that was about to break. They reached the study door, the heavy, oak panel looming before them, a barrier between them and their enemy, between them and the truth. Tommaso took a deep breath, his hand gripping his weapon. He looked at Aurora, his eyes filled with a silent message, a message of love, of protection, of farewell. He pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The moment of reckoning had arrived. This was it. Chapter 16. The masks began to fall. The study was a mirror image of the one in the city mansion, a testament to her father's desire for control, for consistency, even in his sanctuaries. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes, the air thick with the scent of old paper, beeswax, and a faint, lingering trace of cigar smoke. Ricardo stood by the window, his back to the door, his silhouette outlined against the stormy sky. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, swirling it slowly, his posture relaxed, confident. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge their presence, as if he had been expecting them, as if he had orchestrated this entire encounter. "You came," Ricardo said, his voice smooth, oily, devoid of emotion. "I knew you would. You couldn't resist the lure of the truth, could you, Aurora?" He finally turned, his gaze sweeping over them, dismissive, contemptuous. He was dressed in a dark suit, impeccably tailored, his silver hair slicked back, his eyes cold and calculating. He looked every bit the powerful, ruthless mafia don he was. "You killed them," Aurora said, her voice trembling with rage, with grief. "You killed my parents." Ricardo chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Such accusations," he said. "Do you have proof, niece? Or are you simply relying on the ramblings of a delusional old woman and a disgruntled employee?" He gestured towards the door, where Giovanni and Isabella were presumably still hiding. "I have proof," Aurora said, her voice firm, unwavering. She stepped forward, holding out the wooden box, the evidence she had unearthed, the secrets she had uncovered. Letters, photographs, a confession. "It's all here, Ricardo. The truth is out." Ricardo's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. He took a step towards her, his eyes narrowed, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "You think you can defeat me, Aurora?" He sneered. "You think you can challenge me? You're a naive, foolish woman. You know nothing of this world, of the power I wield." Tommaso stepped in front of Aurora, shielding her with his body, his hand gripping his weapon. "She's not alone, Ricardo," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And she's not afraid of you." Ricardo's gaze shifted to Tommaso, his eyes filled with hatred. "You," he spat. "The loyal dog. Always so eager to please, so willing to betray your own kind for a scrap of affection from your master." "I was loyal to Alessandro," Tommaso said, his voice unwavering. "And I'm loyal to his daughter. I will protect her, even from you." Ricardo laughed again, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you can protect her?" he said. "You think you can stop me? I have men everywhere. I control everything. You are nothing, both of you." He drew a pistol from his jacket, a sleek, silver weapon, pointing it directly at Tommaso. "It's over," he said. "It's time to end this charade." But before he could pull the trigger, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Not yet, Ricardo." Everyone turned to look. Standing in the doorway, his body silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway, was Enzo Salvatore, her father's former consigliere, the man they had been searching for, the man who held the key to their salvation. He was older, his hair now completely white, his face lined and weathered, but his eyes still held the same sharp intelligence, the same unwavering loyalty that Aurora remembered from her childhood. He held a gun in his hand, pointed directly at Ricardo. "Salvatore," Ricardo gasped, his voice filled with disbelief, with fear. "You're alive." Salvatore smiled, a cold, mirthless smile. "You thought you had gotten rid of me, Ricardo?" he said. "You thought you had silenced everyone who knew the truth? You were wrong. I was loyal to Alessandro," Salvatore continued, his voice rising in anger. "And I will not let his murderer go unpunished. I will not let you destroy his family, his legacy." He took a step closer, his gun unwavering. "It's over, Ricardo," he said. "Your reign of terror is over." Ricardo's face was a mask of fear, of desperation. He looked from Salvatore to Tommaso, to Aurora, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape, a way out. But there was none. He was trapped, cornered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling around him. The masks had begun to fall, revealing the truth, the ugliness, the betrayal that lay beneath. The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest within the room, the final confrontation between good and evil, between loyalty and treachery. The air was thick with attention. Chapter 17. The Path to Redemption. The standoff in the study was a tableau of frozen tension. Salvatore's arrival had shifted the balance of power, throwing Ricardo into a state of panicked desperation. The air crackled with unspoken threats, with the weight of years of deceit and betrayal. Salvatore, Ricardo stammered, his voice losing its usual smooth confidence. You don't understand. I can explain. There's nothing to explain, Ricardo, Salvatore interrupted, his voice cold and hard. I know everything. I know about the conspiracy, the plot to kill Alessandro, the murder of Eleonora. I have proof. He gestured towards Aurora, towards the wooden box that contained the damning evidence. Your niece has uncovered the truth, Ricardo, he said. And I will make sure that justice is served. Ricardo's gaze darted between Salvatore and Tommaso, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. He knew he was trapped, cornered, but he was still a dangerous man, a desperate man. You can't do this, Salvatore, he said, his voice regaining some of its former arrogance. I am the head of the Derossi family. You have no authority, no power. My authority comes from my loyalty to Alessandro, Salvatore said, his voice unwavering. And my power comes from the truth. The other families, they will not stand for this, Ricardo. They will not tolerate a leader who murders his own brother, who betrays the code. He took a step closer, his gun still pointed at Ricardo. It's over, he repeated. Surrender. Confess your crimes. And maybe, just maybe, you can salvage some shred of honor. Ricardo hesitated, his gaze shifting around the room, searching for an escape, a way out. But there was none. He was surrounded, outnumbered, his power crumbling around him. He slowly lowered his weapon, his hand trembling, his face a mask of defeat. All right, he said, his voice barely a whisper.
All right, I confess.
I killed Alessandro. I killed Eleonora. I did it all. His confession, though forced, though devoid of remorse, sent a wave of relief through Aurora. It was over. The truth was out. Justice, finally, could be served. But just as she began to breathe easier, Ricardo suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Aurora, pulling her in front of him as a shield, his gun pressed against her temple. Don't move, he shouted, his voice filled with desperation, with madness. Don't move, or I'll kill her. I'll kill her, I swear. Tommaso reacted instantly, his body tensing, his weapon raised, but he hesitated, his eyes filled with fear, with uncertainty. He couldn't risk shooting, couldn't risk hitting Aurora. Ricardo, let her go. Tommaso demanded, his voice low and menacing. This is between us. Don't involve her. Ricardo laughed, a hysterical, chilling sound. You think I care?
He said.
You think I have anything to lose? I'm a dead man anyway. I might as well take you all down with me. He tightened his grip on Aurora, his gun pressing harder against her temple. She could feel his breath on her ear, his body trembling with fear, with rage. Don't do this, Ricardo, Aurora said, her voice surprisingly calm, surprisingly steady. It's not too late. You can still redeem yourself. You can still choose the right path. Ricardo hesitated, his grip loosening slightly. He looked at Aurora, his eyes filled with a flicker of confusion, of doubt. Redeem myself?
He scoffed.
There's no redemption for me, Aurora. I'm beyond saving. I've done too much, seen too much.
I'm damned.
It's never too late, Aurora insisted. You can still confess, tell the truth, face the consequences. It's the only way to find peace, to find forgiveness. Her words seemed to penetrate his hardened exterior, reaching some hidden part of him, some buried shred of humanity. The other families had to be informed, the proper channels navigated, the delicate balance of power restored. Salvatore, with his deep connections and unwavering loyalty to the old ways, took the lead, ensuring a smooth transition, minimizing the fallout, protecting the Derossi legacy. Aurora, though still reeling from the shock and the trauma of what had happened, found a newfound strength within herself. She had faced her demons, had confronted the darkness that had haunted her family for generations, and she had emerged, scarred but unbroken. She had found the truth, had avenged her parents' deaths, and she was determined to honor their memory, to rebuild the family, to create a new future. Tommaso remained by her side, his presence a constant source of comfort, of support, of protection. He had fulfilled his vow to her father, had shielded her from harm, had guided her through the treacherous labyrinth of the mafia world. He had proven his loyalty, his devotion, and Aurora realized his love. Giovanni, recovering from his injuries, provided valuable information, corroborating the evidence found in the box, confirming Riccardo's guilt, solidifying the case against him, even in death. He had risked his life to help them, and Aurora was eternally grateful for his bravery, his loyalty. Isabella, too, remained a steadfast ally, her quiet strength, her unwavering devotion, a source of inspiration. She had secrets of her own, a past she had never fully revealed, but Aurora trusted her instincts, trusted the bond they had forged in the crucible of danger and adversity. As the dust began to settle, Aurora found herself grappling with a complex mix of emotions, grief, relief, anger, and a profound sense of loss. She had lost her parents, her uncle, her innocence, her former life. But she had also gained something, a deeper understanding of herself, of her family, of the world she inhabited. She spent hours poring over her mother's diary, reading her words, feeling her presence, seeking her guidance. She realized that her mother had been a prisoner in her own life, trapped by the constraints of the mafia code, by the expectations of her family. She had tried to protect Aurora, to shield her from the darkness, but in the end, she had been unable to escape it herself. Aurora was determined to break the cycle, to create a different future for herself, for her family. She would honor her parents' memory, but she would not be bound by the past. She would forge her own path, guided by her own values, her own conscience. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the Tuscan countryside, Aurora found herself standing in the villa's gardens, near the old, abandoned greenhouse, the place where she had unearthed her mother's secrets, the place where her journey had truly begun. Tommaso came to stand beside her, his presence a silent reassurance, a comforting warmth. He didn't speak, didn't intrude on her thoughts, but simply stood there, offering his support, his understanding. "I've been thinking," Aurora said, her voice soft, reflective, "about my mother, about my father, about Riccardo." Tommaso nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant hills, the fading light. "I can't forgive him," Aurora said, her voice trembling. "I can't forgive him for what he did, for the pain he caused, for the lives he destroyed." But then she paused, her thoughts shifting, her perspective changing.
"But I can understand him," she said.
"I can understand the pressures he faced, the temptations he succumbed to, the darkness that consumed him. He made his choices, Aurora," Tommaso said, his voice gentle, but firm. "He chose the path of violence, of betrayal. He could have chosen differently." "I know," Aurora said. "But I can't hate him. I can't let hatred consume me, the way it consumed him. I need to let go. I need to move on." She looked at Tommaso, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "I want to forgive him," she said. "Not for his sake, but for my own. I want to find peace. I want to heal." Tommaso reached out, his hand covering hers, his touch sending a warmth through her, a sense of connection, of shared understanding. "Forgiveness is not easy, Aurora," he said. "It's a process, a journey. But it's a journey worth taking. It's the only way to truly break free from the past, to create a new future." He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a love that transcended words, a love that had endured the trials and tribulations of their shared experience. "And you're not alone, Aurora," he said. "I'm here. I'll always be here. We'll face this together, whatever the future holds." His words were a promise, a vow, a testament to the bond they had forged, the love they had found amidst the darkness. Aurora leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace, of hope, of belonging. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the gardens, the villa, the landscape. But the darkness no longer held the same terror, the same power. Aurora had found the strength within herself, the strength of forgiveness, the strength to move on, to create a new legacy, a new life. She had Tommaso. Chapter 19. Reclaiming the Stolen Years. With Riccardo gone and Salvatore temporarily at the helm, Aurora faced a daunting decision: embrace her birthright and lead the de Rossi family, or retreat back into the quiet anonymity she had so carefully cultivated. The weight of her heritage, the responsibility of her legacy, pressed down on her, a heavy burden she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. She spent days wandering through the villa, touching the familiar objects, breathing in the familiar scents, trying to connect with the ghosts of her past, seeking guidance, seeking answers. She visited her father's study, her mother's sitting room, the gardens where she had played as a child. Everywhere she went, she felt their presence, their influence, their expectations. She also spent time with Salvatore, learning about the intricacies of the family business, the complexities of the mafia world, the delicate balance of power that had to be maintained. He was a patient teacher, a wise mentor, sharing his knowledge, his experience, guiding her through the treacherous labyrinth of alliances, rivalries, and unspoken codes. She learned about the other families, their strengths, their weaknesses, their ambitions. She learned about the various enterprises the de Rossis controlled, the legitimate businesses, the illicit activities, the vast network of connections that spanned continents. She also learned more about Tommaso, about his past, his loyalty to her father, his role in protecting the family. She discovered that he had been more than just a bodyguard, more than just a confidant. He had been her father's right-hand man, his enforcer, his most trusted ally. He had carried out his orders, had protected his interests, had even, she suspected, killed for him. This knowledge, though unsettling, didn't diminish her feelings for Tommaso. She had seen his gentleness, his compassion, his vulnerability. She knew that he was a complex man, a product of his environment, a man who had been forced to make difficult choices, to walk a dangerous path. She also realized that he was changing, evolving. He was no longer the hardened enforcer, the loyal soldier. He was questioning his past, his choices, his future. He was seeking a different life, a life of peace, of redemption. A life, perhaps, with her. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace, watching the sun set over the Tuscan countryside, Aurora finally made her decision. "I can't do it, Tommaso," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I can't lead the family. I'm not cut out for it. I'm not a de Rossi, not in the way they expect me to be." Tommaso looked at her, his dark eyes filled with understanding, with acceptance. He had sensed her doubts, her reservations, her inner turmoil. "I know," he said. "And I support your decision, Aurora. Whatever you choose, I'll be there for you." "I want to honor my parents' memory," Aurora said. "I want to preserve their legacy, but in a different way. I want to use the family's resources, its influence, to do good, to help people, to make a difference." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "I want to create a foundation," she said. "A charitable organization, dedicated to helping victims of violence, to supporting education, to promoting peace. I want to use the de Rossi name for something positive, something meaningful." Tommaso smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "That's a wonderful idea, Aurora," he said. "It's a fitting tribute to your parents, to their legacy. And it's something I would be honored to be a part of." "And you?" Aurora asked, her voice hesitant, hopeful. "What will you do? Will you stay with the family? Will you continue the old ways?" Tommaso shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm done with that life, Aurora. I've seen too much violence, too much death. I want something different. I want peace. I want you." He reached out, his hand covering hers, his touch sending a warmth through her, a sense of connection, of belonging. "I want to be with you, Aurora," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Wherever you go, whatever you do, I want to be by your side." Aurora's heart swelled with emotion, with a love that had blossomed amidst the darkness, a love that had endured the trials and tribulations of their shared experience. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace, of contentment, of hope. "I want that too, Tommaso," she said, her voice a whisper, a promise. "I want to be with you." They sat there in silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, the moon casting a silvery glow on the landscape. They had reclaimed the stolen years, had faced the ghosts of the past, had found a path to redemption, to forgiveness, to love. The future was uncertain, unknown, but they would face it together, hand in hand, their hearts intertwined, their destinies forever linked. They would build a new legacy, a legacy of hope, of compassion, of peace. A legacy worthy of the Derasi name. The final family meeting loomed. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. The meeting was held in the grand dining room of the city mansion, the same room where Aurora had once shared lavish meals with her family, the same room where the seeds of betrayal had been sown. The long, mahogany table, usually laden with food and wine, was now bare, polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the somber faces of the assembled family members. Salvatore, acting as the interim head, sat at the head of the table, his posture erect, his expression grave. He had summoned the key players, the capos, the lieutenants, the trusted advisors, to announce Aurora's decision, to chart a new course for the Derasi family. Aurora sat beside him, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was dressed in a simple, black dress, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her only adornment the silver amulet, her mother's amulet, which she wore around her neck, a symbol of protection, of remembrance. Tommaso sat on her other side, his presence a silent reassurance, a source of strength. He was dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable, his eyes constantly scanning the room, alert for any sign of dissent, any hint of treachery. The room was filled with a tense silence, a palpable sense of anticipation, of uncertainty. The family members, hardened men and women, accustomed to violence and intrigue, were unsure what to expect. They had heard rumors, whispers, of Aurora's return, of Riccardo's death, of Salvatore's leadership. But they didn't know the full story, didn't know what the future held. Salvatore cleared his throat, his voice echoing in the vast room. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice firm and authoritative, "to address the recent events, to chart a new course for the Derasi family." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces, assessing their reactions, gauging their loyalty. "As you know," he continued, "Riccardo Derasi is dead. He died by his own hand, after confessing to the murders of Alessandro and Eleonora Derasi." A murmur rippled through the room, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and relief. Some of the family members had suspected Riccardo's treachery, had resented his leadership, but they had never dared to challenge him, to question his authority. His actions were a betrayal of the family, a violation of the code, Salvatore said, his voice rising in anger. "He brought shame upon us, endangered our interests, threatened our very existence." He paused again, letting his words sink in. "But we have overcome this challenge," he said. "We have exposed the truth, have avenged the deaths of Alessandro and Eleonora. And we have a new leader, a new direction." He turned to Aurora, his expression softening slightly. "Aurora Derasi," he said, "the sole surviving heir of Alessandro, has returned. She has faced her past, has confronted the darkness that haunted our family, and she has emerged stronger, wiser, more determined than ever." He gestured for Aurora to stand. She rose, her legs trembling slightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the assembled family members, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and respect. "I know I am an outsider," she began, her voice hesitant, but gaining strength with each word. "I know I have been away for many years. I know I have a lot to learn." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But I am a Derasi," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. And I am committed to honoring my parents' memory, to preserving our family's legacy, but in a new way. She outlined her vision, her plan to create a foundation, to use the family's resources to do good, to help others, to make a positive impact on the world. She spoke of her desire to break the cycle of violence, to move away from the illicit activities, to focus on legitimate businesses, on charitable endeavors. Her words were met with a mixture of reactions. Some of the family members, the older, more traditional ones, were resistant, skeptical, even hostile. They had grown accustomed to the old ways, to the power and the wealth that came with the mafia's illicit activities. Others, however, were intrigued, even supportive. They had grown weary of the violence, the constant threat of betrayal, the endless cycle of revenge. They saw in Aurora's vision a chance for a different future, a future of peace, of respectability, of redemption. The debate was heated, intense, the arguments passionate, the voices raised. Tommaso remained silent, observing, assessing, ready to intervene if necessary, to protect Aurora from any threat. Finally, after hours of discussion, of negotiation, of compromise, a consensus was reached. The family would support Aurora's vision, would allow her to create the foundation, would begin to transition away from the illicit activities towards more legitimate enterprises. It was a victory, a hard-fought victory, but it was also just the beginning. Aurora knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be challenges, setbacks, resistance. But she was determined to succeed, to honor her parents' memory, to create a new legacy for the Derossi family. As the meeting concluded, the family members dispersed, their faces a mixture of relief, uncertainty, and hope. Aurora remained at the table, exhausted but exhilarated, her heart filled with a sense of purpose, of determination. Tommaso came to stand beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his touch sending a warmth through her, a sense of connection, of shared triumph. "You did it, Aurora," he said, his voice filled with pride, with admiration. "You changed them. You changed everything." Aurora smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "We did it, Tommaso," she said. Together. They looked at each other, their eyes meeting, their hearts intertwined. They had faced the darkness together, had emerged stronger, wiser, more in love than ever. They had found their path, their purpose, their future. The final confrontation had been won, not with violence, not with force, but with courage, with conviction, with love. The Derossi family had been transformed, redeemed, reborn. And Aurora, the reluctant heiress, the quiet bookseller, had become their leader, their savior, their hope. It was a conclusion and also a very special beginning. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to Aurora's vision, to her determination, to her unwavering commitment to creating a new legacy for the Derossi family. The foundation flourished, becoming a beacon of hope, a source of support for countless individuals, a testament to the power of compassion, of forgiveness, of redemption. Aurora, with Tommaso by her side, dedicated her life to the foundation, pouring her heart and soul into its mission, transforming the Derossi name from one associated with fear and violence to one synonymous with generosity and kindness. They worked tirelessly, traveling the world, meeting with beneficiaries, overseeing projects, raising awareness, inspiring others to join their cause. The family, though initially resistant to some of the changes, gradually embraced Aurora's leadership, recognizing the wisdom of her vision, the benefits of her approach. They diversified their holdings, investing in legitimate businesses, supporting ethical enterprises, moving away from the shadows of their past towards a brighter, more sustainable future. Salvatore, though officially retired, remained a trusted advisor, a wise mentor, a guiding force, ensuring the family stayed true to its new course, honoring the old ways while embracing the new. He watched with pride as Aurora blossomed into a strong, confident leader, a woman who had defied expectations, who had transformed her family, who had made a real difference in the world. Giovanni, fully recovered from his injuries, became a valuable member of Aurora's team, his loyalty unwavering, his commitment to her cause absolute. He had found redemption, a new purpose, a chance to atone for his past mistakes. Isabella, too, remained a close confidant, a trusted friend, her secrets still guarded, but her devotion to Aurora unquestioned. She had found peace, a sense of belonging, a place within the new Darasi family. Aurora and Tommaso, their love deepened by their shared experiences, by their commitment to their cause, by their unwavering support for each other, built a life together, a life filled with purpose, with passion, with love. They never forgot the darkness they had faced, the sacrifices they had made, the price they had paid. But they had emerged stronger, wiser, more in love than ever. They often returned to the villa, to the place where their journey had begun, to the place where they had unearthed the secrets of the past, to the place where they had found each other. They would walk through the gardens, hand in hand, remembering, reflecting, renewing their commitment to their shared vision. One evening, as they stood on the terrace, watching the sun set over the Tuscan countryside, the sky ablaze with color, Aurora turned to Tommaso, her eyes filled with a love that transcended words, a love that had endured the test of time. "We did it, Tommaso," she said, her voice soft, filled with emotion. "We really did it." Tommaso smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his hand reaching out to caress her cheek. "We did, amore mio," he said. "We created a new legacy. A legacy of love, of hope, of peace." He leaned in, his lips meeting hers, their kiss a seal on their shared journey, a promise of a future filled with love, with happiness, with purpose. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest. The darkness had been banished. The stolen years had been reclaimed. They had found their happy ending, not in the shadows of the mafia world, but in the light of their own making, in the strength of their love, in the power of their forgiveness, in the beauty of their shared dream. They had a family, finally, built not on blood, but on a bond far stronger.